Welcome to the NFL MVP Momentum Podcast. I'm Sam Holcroft, joined alongside Payton Thompson. Before we begin, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP, follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. So today, we're going to recap some news that we talked about in a previous podcast about, I want to say probably a month ago or so. We'll talk about Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, and then we'll talk about the two new signings that happened earlier this week with Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook. So, PT, first we're going to talk about my guy, Josh Jacobs. Still no word on if he's going to join the team quite yet. I'm not, as the season's about 3 weeks away, less than that now, I'm starting to get a little worried. I don't know if he's going to be coming back. There's a lot of people who are expecting him to come back. Even GM, I think Dave Ziegler, he's expecting him to come back. The team's quote unquote encouraging him to sign the franchise tag, which sounds desperate, but I'm still a little nervous. You thought that he was going to be back at the beginning of the season. You still think he's going to be back?
Yeah, I think so. I think he comes back, plays up until, a certain point. I think he comes back, he plays the season. But I think the worst case scenario is that you don't sign him to that long-term deal. And then the Raiders kind of look how we talked about them looking a few weeks ago, really rough, not making the playoffs. And maybe he goes to greener pastures and maybe thinks another team is able to utilize him more. Maybe he's able to get a more fresh start and get paid. But I think the Raiders are kind of in a tough position, like we talked about before, where, you if you sign Josh Jacobs to a long-term deal and you're not sure exactly where the direction of this team is going, then you're kind of at a crossroad where you can't completely rebuild because you have this top 5, top 6 running back with a long-term contract, and you don't have enough money to kind of build a team otherwise. So, it's tough. But Josh Jacobs to me hasn't ever really seemed like a guy that would hold out and not play games for his team. And I believe he reported to training camp as well. So, obviously the GM wants to get a long-term deal done, and I'm sure Josh Jacobs does as well, but the money has to be right. And I don't think he's going to settle for anything less than what he thinks he deserves. But, the harder part about this for me is like, how much money does he really want? How much money does it make sense for him, and how much money does it make sense for the Raiders to sign him for? Because when you look at other running backs throughout the league, obviously there's guaranteed money and there's the length of the contract, and that matters a lot to running backs. That's probably what he's more focused on than the actual salary itself. So maybe if they can find a little bit of a compromise as far as the length goes and guaranteed money, then they can get it to work. But I just don't know exactly where the Raiders are wanting to go with this.
Yeah, and I see this in this article that we're looking at right here. No free agent running back has signed a contract worth more than $7 million in annual average value. So it's hard to go out there and get a contract if you're a running back. So it depends on how much he really wants, or if we've talked, I think on the podcast a couple times ago, or off air, it's like, maybe they just want a long-term deal with a decent amount of guaranteed money just because they know that running backs can get turned over so easily. We've seen so many guys. We're going to talk about Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. Both of those guys got cut from their team earlier this spring and summer, and now they're on new teams. So just because the teams wanted to move on to the younger guy. So then we'll move on to Jonathan Taylor. So, there was that conflicting arguments or reports about how he requested a trade, and then he tweeted when that news broke, he's like, I don't know where you're getting this, but I didn't say that, and stuff like that. So who knows what the truth really is? This is really some murky waters here. So he was at training camp, not participating. Don't know if he still kind of has that resentment towards the front office, it doesn't want to play, or if he's still nursing that ankle injury. I know that he left training camp I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, and he came back after getting some treatment on his ankle. But I mean, I don't know what's going on in Indy. Like, and now he's been excused away from the Colts for personal matters. So, what do you make of the situation? This is some really weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what you said, it's just really a confusing situation. And I think the injury makes it even more, concerning and confusing because if he hadn't been injured, it would have been a lot less time he would have spent away from the team throughout the season. And at this point, he probably would have been a little bit more connected with his team and with the front office and a little bit more or better communication, I should say. So, it makes it kind of tough. And then this personal matter thing came up recently this past week, and so that makes it even more confusing. And kind of we talked about off air a little bit. I don't know if this is potentially maybe his like a real personal issue with maybe some family matter or whatnot, or maybe it was just communication with the front office and his team and his teammates that maybe it's a better idea for him to step away and kind of think about how maybe he's affecting the team, and then maybe the time away from the front office and kind of how the front office is thinking about things. And maybe some separation can be good, but I think what's important to this situation is that for the Colts, with a young quarterback and Anthony Richardson, with a team that could potentially be good but isn't going to be great more than likely, they need a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Their offense is kind of built around him. It has been the past couple of years, and we saw without him last year, him going down, having an aging quarterback and Matt Ryan, who was a shell of himself. The team looked like a complete disaster. But the year before then, with the offensive line and the upsurge in the defense, we thought maybe the Colts could really make a splash and keep getting better. But as time has gone by, I think they've kind of trended down as far as the AFC goes. And the AFC isn't getting any easier. So, yeah, it's a tough spot to be in for both parties. But I think for both parties involved, the best option is to get a deal done. But I just don't know exactly how that's going to get done. And then you throw in the factor that Jonathan Taylor's coming off a season-ending injury, and that doesn't make things any easier because, relatively in his college career, he's been a guy that's been healthy. I think he only missed maybe one game in college and maybe none. I don't remember exactly, but I know he didn't miss more than two or one in college, and he had the season-ending injury, and that's all it takes to start an injury history. So I think the worst thing that could happen for the front office is that they sign him to a long-term deal, and then he has the same lingering issues throughout the next couple of years, and he kind of ends up being a running back that's just never the same. But on the flip side of that, the best case scenario is, you sign him to a long-term deal, things start to get repaired in the front office, and then you're able to, keep getting better that way, and then you have that rapport with him and Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and it also depends on what Jonathan Taylor wants because he's been in the league for I think 3-4 years now. I think might be going into his fourth year. Um, and so your team just drafted with the fourth overall pick a quarterback. You know that you're kind of heading into rebuild mode. You know that your career is not going to be super long. By the time that he's going to be ready to lead you guys to a Super Bowl or into the playoffs, because I don't think Jonathan Taylor's played in the playoffs yet. I don't think they haven't made the playoffs at all. So it's
Yeah.
probably something that he wants to do, but he knows that that's still like 2 years away. So he could be like, you know what, I might just hold out the rest of his contract, and I could try to leave in free agency, or they could trade me, or whatever. Like I just don't want to be here because I don't want to be here for the rebuild. And honestly, that's kind of what happened with Christian McCaffrey, is because
Mhm.
they kept on getting new quarterbacks. And then last year they went and got Baker, and that did not work. And then I think by that point he was like, look, if Baker can't lead us to the playoffs, then I want out. And
Mhm.
they were like, you know what, you've given us so much, we'll make it happen for you. Jonathan Taylor doesn't have that leverage. Christian McCaffrey, you can argue, when healthy, has been one of the top three, if not, the best running back in the league the last few years, rivaling with Derrick Henry or maybe even Saquon. So, but Jonathan Taylor, he had that one good year. I feel like decent rookie year. And then last year was okay, but then he had that season ending injury. So I really feel like Jonathan Taylor doesn't have as much leverage to try to get out. So I think, if he doesn't play games, he's not going to get paid. So I think it's going to be in his best interest to play. But I think what he's worried about, playing, getting injured again, not getting a big contract, and then some other teams being like, you know what, he's got 2 bad injuries. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to take that chance. Kind of like you said.
Hmm.
So since we touched up on those guys, let's talk about the signings that happened earlier this week. So first one we'll talk about Ezekiel Elliott. Signed with the Patriots on Monday for a 1-year, $6 million deal. Not getting paid from the Cowboys, unlike Dalvin Cook is, but we'll talk about him lately. So when you first heard the news, what was your initial reaction?
Honestly, I mean, I'll kind of take this from multiple sides. I think for me, for him, I thought, hey, it's a good landing spot for him. Not only because I think him and Belichick and the team that's kind of, I don't want to say mediocre, but average at best is kind of where he needs to be. I don't think he's really built for a contending team anymore, but I don't think that putting him on a really bad team and giving him a whole bunch of touches would really help him in his career at this point either. But I think on a team like this, that's going to be able to properly utilize his run game and mix his style in with Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris, I think is a good idea. He's not going to have to take on a whole lot of the work, but he's going to be able to be a serviceable back that has experience on a good running team before. And if anyone is able to get a touch of what he used to be back, it's Bill Belichick. And hopefully he can help Mac Jones or whoever they want to go further into the future with their quarterback position. But as far as the organization themselves, I think signing him to I believe is a 1-year $6 million deal is a pretty fair deal for them. It's not anything long term that's low risk, but it's a guy that has experience and a guy that doesn't have to take on a whole lot of the load. And we've seen in spurts when he gets his chances, he can do a decent amount with. But like I said before, it's not anything long term. It's no real pressure for the organization and for the team itself, because if he doesn't end up being anything that he used to be, they still have Stevenson and Harris to be that 1-2 punch. But if he does, then they have a really good trio they can rotate through.
Yeah. And actually, Harris is now with the Buffalo Bills, I believe. So,
Mm,
yeah, he's not
gotcha.
there anymore, which is why I really like this signing for the Patriots. So they still have 2 guys in that backfield because Ramondre Stevenson, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he does finish like top 10 in rushing yards this upcoming year before the Ezekiel thing. Um,
Hmm.
but it's like, is that going to be because a lot of guys got injured? Is it because, like, I mean, we don't expect the Patriots to be, I mean, that's probably the hardest division in football this year. Maybe AFC North, the only one that's really above that. And they're unfortunately the bottom team in that division. You're going to have to play the Dolphins twice, the Bills twice, and the Jets twice. So it's going to be hard to, even if you could come out of that with a 500 record in just those 6 games, that's a win. Because I don't think that they have the rosters as well as those other 3 teams. But I feel like adding Zeke will help out, especially because he's been in a duo back system before. Ramondre kind of, but he was more of the alpha than Damian was. And like you said earlier, Zeke has been taking steps back. And I feel like that this is a good opportunity for him to kind of show the league, like, hey, I still got something. I still got one more 3-year contract in me. So whether it's with the Patriots or not, but what my initial thought was is like Bill Belichick wanted Ezekiel Elliott. I was like, because we saw like because like Ezekiel Elliott, we kind of view him as kind of like one of those kind of like unique personalities, kind of like how a Cam Newton was. So
Hmm.
I was really confused because I'm like, you remember what happened when you signed Cam, right? Like it didn't work. You and him clashed. But Bill Belichick really wanted Ezekiel. He said, we had a good visit with him, and I look forward to working with him, which is obviously very bland and Bill Belichick. But I mean,
Right.
I mean, that's praise from Bill Belichick. That's he's excited to work with them. So I feel
Hmm.
like if Bill thinks that this is a good idea, then I trust it. But is it going to help them win games? They might. I could see them going from like a 7-10 team or 8-9 to like getting one more win. They can maybe be a 500 team next year now for me, but I don't think it's going to move the needle. I don't think the acquisition of Ezekiel Elliott is going to help them get over the Jets, Bills, or Dolphins. So it's just
Yeah.
to help their case to be a wild card team. Especially and now, if Ezekiel Elliott wasn't on the downhill, we could maybe have a different conversation. But the fact of the matter is that he has been taking steps back as of late.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I don't really think it adds too much to the win total. But I think a big difference between when you talk about kind of his personality and him clashing possibly with Belichick and how things are structured there in Cam Newton. I think the difference between him and a guy like Cam Newton is that I think always in Zeke's career he was able to take a backseat sometimes and he was able to play his role. But when Cam Newton wasn't that guy, not saying he wasn't a good leader. I think he's a good leader, but I feel like sometimes him not starting maybe rubbed off wrong on some of the people that he played with. Whereas I think Zeke, and maybe it's kind of the what do you call it, the territory of the position, where I think as a running back you can be okay with being a number two, but as a quarterback, if you're a number two, then you're usually like a specific number two. It's not like a tandem. It's more of a we have a QB1, you're our QB2. And so I think in that situation, and I also think that Elliott knows that he's not going to be their first option as the running back at this point in his career because he has a lot of miles on him, especially from Ohio State as well. And I think he's kind of accepted that position, and I think he's ready to be more of a backseat kind of guy. And I think what he really just wanted is an opportunity to be a part of a team that could be at least a solid team. I didn't think he wanted to be part of a team that was going to be bad necessarily, even if he got more touches. I think he wanted to be part of a good culture, even if they didn't get the most wins. But yeah, I think it's a good landing spot for him.
Yeah, and I was a little concerned with how Ramondre Stevenson uh, feels, especially like when you were the alpha last year. Yeah, you lost your backup, but Ramondre Stevenson, he's accepting this, and he even called him my guy. And I feel like that this is going to be a good opportunity. I don't know who the one will be, but I feel like that this is definitely going to be like a duo backfield like Zeke's been in for the last few years. So
Yeah,
I think it's going to help this offense, especially with the questions of Mac Jones. But um, yeah, I don't see it helping in the win total much. I feel like Zeke probably did this more so for his career, just to go like because like if there's any coach that can make me what I used to be, it's probably Bill Belichick. He'll he'll help me get to that level, and I'll get one more contract, and then I can ride off into the sunset after that.
yep,
Yep. So then we'll talk about Dalvin Cook now, which is a totally different kind of situation. So his contract, he signed a 1 year, $7 million salary, and he's also still getting paid $2 million from the Minnesota Vikings, something that Zeke wasn't getting. So he's essentially getting paid 9 million. Once he hits those incentives as well. So we had the news that Ezekiel was signing with the Patriots. I think it was on Monday, and then I think it was like 45 minutes later, the Dalvin Cook news broke out that he was signing with the Jets, and this one was I wasn't really prepared for that because I know Kareem Hunt visited them. I think earlier this last few weeks, and he left without a deal. So, what was your reaction on the Dalvin Cook news?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this situation's a bit more different than the Zeke situation because I think Dalvin Cook has shown that he has a lot more in the tank left as a premier running back. But honestly, to tell you the truth, I think it's a really good move for the Jets. But for me, coming out of college, out of Iowa State, I was a big fan of Brees Hall, and obviously he had that big injury last year that cost him the season. But I really thought Brees Hall showed that he can be an RB1, and I liked Michael Carter coming out of North Carolina as well. And so, I think it's going to be a good trio there. But I think it's going to be interesting to see who they deem as the RB1 because I think when you talk about talent alone, I think Dalvin Cook is that guy. But I think the team really rallied behind Brees Hall. And even in a season where they didn't really have a leader at that quarterback position with Zach Wilson, and so yeah, I think the team really liked Brees Hall, and he was kind of that leader on offense a lot of the time, especially with a younger receiver in Garrett Wilson, who is also a rookie. And I think they wanted him to kind of grow with the team. So I can't say I necessarily like it for Brees Hall, but for reasons where you kind of have to protect your long term or possibly your long term running back in Brees Hall, him coming off injury. I like it for him. And I like it for Dalvin Cook a lot. I think, it's kind of the team that he was looking for as far as they're going to be able to be really good, have a chance to make the playoffs, and who knows what the ceiling could be. It's a good defense, so he's not going to have to play, 70% of the game. It's going to be, you know, get on the field, do your thing, let the defense do their thing, and have a good balance that way. He's not going to have to be on the field all the time. And so, I think with that being said, and also having Aaron Rodgers, also a veteran that's going to be able to tap in with his veteran, experience, I think it's a good fit. And as far as the contract goes, it's also, short term, so there's no real risk there. Obviously, he's getting that 2 million from the Vikings, so he's getting paid 9 million annually. So he's getting his money as still a top back in the league, and I think it's really good for everyone involved here.
Yeah, I feel like that this was a good spot for him to land at, uh, because I mean I like Brees Hall, and I thought that he was going to have a great season last year if he didn't go down. Michael Carter did the job last year, but I said I believe it was in a podcast, but I said that I feel like the Jets are a running back away from being serious Super Bowl contenders. And I feel like that this is the guy that they needed. Now, obviously, I was probably thinking like a Josh Jacobs trade or a Derrick Henry trade potentially. But Dalvin Cook still has a lot left in the tank. Minnesota just wanted to move on to Alexander Madison, and that's fine. Uh, Dalvin Cook, can still be a top 10 running back in the league. I don't expect him to be a top five, but I mean, this is a great backfield. This could be a three-headed monster back here. Certain sets Michael Carter can be in. Brees Hall can have some sets. Dalvin Cook will take probably majority. And that's just that offense is going to be scary. They added Alan Lazard. I think Mercedes Lewis also went there. You know, they've added Dalvin Cook. Something huge that has been helping, and obviously the Jets knew that this would happen as soon as they did it. But Dalvin Cook literally came out and said, "Aaron Rodgers' presence help help me land at the Jets." That made that spot like good. So having such a great quarterback like Aaron Rodgers just will bring talent to you. Now, how much longer does Aaron Rodgers have? This year, maybe next year. So if you aren't convinced that the Jets are going for the Super Bowl this year, then obviously you are not paying attention. They're going all in on this year. We had them in our tier list a couple of weeks ago as Super Bowl contenders, not on what we thought, but what they thought as an organization. So, yeah, I feel bad for Brees Hall because I feel like that he can be a RB1 somewhere. Um, and he'll probably be the RB1 next year for New York because I don't think Dalvin's going to stay. I think he just wanted to come and compete, try to win a Super Bowl here. But last or 2 weeks ago, I said that the Dolphins are my favorite to like beat out the Bills, but I have to go back on it. I really think that Dalvin Cook helps them edge out the Dolphins here. And the conversation is now between Bills and Jets for the AFC East.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think it's too hot of a take for sure. I think it's going to come down to the offense as a whole, because I think when you compare, Tua and Aaron Rodgers, I think as of right now, I think Tua can stack up, but it's going to come down to receivers, and I think the Dolphins just have that slight edge. Obviously, we're going to have to make sure Jalen Waddle is healthy, but you talk about Tyreek Hill plus Jalen Waddle versus Garrett Wilson, and who's their number two? Is it still Jameson? Um, I don't remember exactly, but I guess we have to see kind of what. I mean, obviously Dalvin Cook's better than Raheem Mostert, but yeah, I don't think that's a hot take at all. But like you said, yeah, they're definitely going all in on this year, and I think that Brees Hall can be a good number one next year if he's healthy, and maybe not even have to be a complete number one next year. Maybe Dalvin Cook comes back for another year, they run it back, and maybe they have more of a 50-50 split, or maybe Dalvin Cook even takes a kind of lesser role, and Brees Hall steps up as that alpha guy. But no matter what, I think he's a good veteran for Michael Carter and Brees Hall. So, no matter what happens, they got them closer to where they want to be at. But we're gonna have to see how the offense looks as a whole. But as long as he's healthy, and he was relatively healthy last year, I think it can make a big difference to their offense.
Yeah, I'm expecting great things from this Jets offense. They made so many additions. You could say that they found, their wide receiver two, uh, starting running back and starting quarterback, all in the last 3 months, basically 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, this offense is going to be totally different because it wasn't their defense is the reason that they missed the playoffs. It was their offense. So, yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
expecting
Yep.
great things from this Jets team. Still contemplating on whether or not I have them gonna winning the division, but I got about like a week or so to try to figure that out.
Yep. Yep.
So, is there anything else you need to add about any of the guys that we talked about?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you one question, and before you answer, or I guess after you answer, I'm gonna ask you this one question. As far as the Cowboys and the Vikings are related, who do you think has a better season as their newfound position as RB1? Alexander Madison or Tony Pollard?
I'll say probably Tony Pollard, just because he was splitting a lot of time with Ezekiel the last few years. Alexander Madison, I mean, Dalvin Cook played all 17 games last year. Madison showed some glimmer of like, this could be our next guy, but he
Mm-hmm.
never was the alpha. It was always Dalvin. So I feel like Tony Pollard, just because
Right.
he's been in that role more. Um, but I am expecting Madison. The Vikings wouldn't have done this if they didn't trust that Madison was going to do something special. So wouldn't be surprised if Madison is better than Pollard, but right now I would say Pollard.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially when you account for the offensive lines. I mean, the Cowboys have still a top five offensive line in that league, and that's going to continue to help Dak and everyone in that offense as well, with Tony Pollard. But, I'm actually going to go on the flip side. I think Alexander Madison has a slightly better season, and I'll tell you why. I think teams are going to be so hyper focused on Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Hawkinson that the running game is going to be kind of an afterthought. And then, right when they think that they have the offense stopped, Alexander Madison is going to still have his fresh legs and he's going to be able to break one loose. And I think I see Tony Pollard maybe being a little bit more of a consistent back on a game to game basis, but I think Madison is going to have bigger games where teams are so focused on stopping the passing attack, that he's going to be able to have whatever he wants a lot of the time in some games. I think that happened a lot with Dalvin Cook, and I think it could happen with Alexander Madison. But it's probably going to be pretty close as far as production goes. But like you said before, I mean, Tony Pollard's been in the position for a little bit longer. He's had more games where he's kind of proven what he could be. and the offensive line does matter at the end of the day.
Yep, I agree with that. So, is there another question, or was that it?
That's it.
All right. Well, good conversation, PT. Excited to see what the Jets and Patriots offense can do. Hoping to see that we can see some clarity with Jonathan Taylor. And, oh gosh, every day I'm hoping to see the notification that Josh Jacobs has started training camp. But once again,
You're going to see Josh Jacobs is holding out.
yeah, I'm going to get the notification. He's still holding out. I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Way to ruin my lunch break, guys. Once again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP. Follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check us out at MVP, or check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. I've been Sam Holcroft.
I've been Payton Thompson.
Thanks for listening.